Well, good morning. Since you're here and watching, you probably remembered to set your clock back 1 hour last night. If you didn't, you've probably been waiting for us for the past hour. But we're not here today to talk about the time. The debate about the budget and other issues is still ongoing in Lansing. So today we'll get some insights from someone directly involved. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, State Representative Bo Lefebvre represents the citizens of Delta, Dickinson, and Menominee counties in Michigan's 108th House District. A graduate of Kingsford High School, he earned a bachelor's degree in international relations and political economy from Michigan State University, and then completed 1 year at Wayne State in pursuit of a law degree. He put those plans on hold when he ran for the House seat in 2016. He's now in his second term in the Michigan legislature. Representative Lefebvre, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Thank you so much for having me once again.
I'm thinking that degree in international relations might be handy now with the way things are going in Lansing.
Well, it's certainly...
it's not international. But
well, they're all related, and when
Right.
you talk about international relations, it's local government at a bigger level, and what it really boils down to is relationship building and trying to see things from other people's perspective and not getting stuck in your own bubble.
Michigan went for 8 years with Republican legislature, Republican governor, and now, and that was your first term. And now this year we have a Republican legislature, a Democratic governor, different circumstances. How do you see that working out?
Well, as far as guns and pro-life issues, this governor is not much different from the last one, but you know, it really does make a difference. The other party, the minority party, has somebody at the table with them negotiating on bills of importance on both sides of the issue. So it really does change a little bit with the negotiation. It's not just one side, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, so let's talk about the budget, because that's got all the attention. Governor proposes a budget, legislature passes a budget which doesn't agree with her on everything. She signs the budget but does some vetoes and makes some administrative changes. Where do you feel we stand today?
Yeah, the House proposed a budget to have most funding in Michigan school history, also more money than ever before in Michigan history. The governor line item vetoed and cut $1.6 billion of the $59 billion budget and used an obscure administrative board to do such. Basically, 6 of her appointees get to apparently move money wherever they want. Took $1 million from the Sulaks project and sent it down to new buses in Detroit. That's a national security concern. We need the Sulaks, we need them built. That's why the Republicans and Democrats agreed in the House and Senate to fund it, but the governor apparently doesn't care about national security.
Well, let's talk about that since you brought it up. The State Administrative Board apparently has this authority based on the Constitution. And it sounds like the only governor to previously use this was Governor Engler. And this seems to be really one of the main sticking points right now in the discussions, isn't it?
Yeah, the governor under statute, not under the Constitution, is allowed to move money around, apparently spend money on whatever she wants. So when the legislature authorizes $59 billion to be spent, we specifically set it to individual things. We wanted $400 million for extra funding in roads and a couple other key projects. She line item vetoed $2,500 for a veteran cemetery in the Upper Peninsula that I put in the budget, for example. So line items are fine, those are constitutional, but this administrative board that gets to cut funding projects in some areas and resend the money to other areas, that's by statute. I think it's a perversion of the written law of the statute. It was an unintended consequence of bad drafting. So the problem with restoring some of that funding is we might say, well, okay, well, we're gonna put the money back in for the Sulaks, and then she can turn around and just spend that money wherever she wants. And that's a problem.
And your leaders, and I mean the Speaker of the House and the leader in the Senate, have said they want some guarantees here, or they want something changed. She has said she's not going to give up executive power for herself or future governors. So how does this get resolved?
Well, the governor needs to realize that the legislature is going to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, and we're not going to let her spend the money on whatever she feels like. That's not how things work. I believe it's anti-constitutional. The House of Representatives and the Senate together have the combined power of the purse. The executive doesn't get to just move money around wherever he or she feels like it. And I think it's a terrible precedent to set. I was disappointed that a Republican governor set it in the first place, and then a Democrat governor blew it out of the water and expanded it to over $600 million.
Many observers believe there's been a lot of political gamesmanship going on here throughout this whole process, that some of the governor's vetoes were intended to get Republicans back to the negotiating table and to get some changes made, and Republicans have kind of come up with some supplemental bills, but now it appears they're not willing to pass those bills unless these changes are made with the guarantee of how the money will be spent. Is that accurate?
So here's a good example. Representative Markkinen has introduced a bill to bring the $40 million of rural health care funding back. Representative Cambenzi did $7 million of rural isolated school district funding, and I did $4 million supplemental for county veteran service officers, all of which that the governor line item vetoed. Let's say we get a 2/3 majority, get those overridden. The governor could take the $40 million from Representative Markkinen and spend it on urban health care. The $7 million for isolated school districts she could spend in Detroit schools, which admittedly need money too, but that's not what that $7 million is for. And the $4 million for county VSOs who fund the service officers in each of our counties that I've sponsored, she could take that and move it to a memorial in Grand Rapids if she wanted to. So we cannot override these vetoes if she's just going to turn around and spend the money on whatever she feels like.
I understand that there is conversation going on, that she has met with the leaders of the House and Senate on both sides of the political aisle. Are those conversations being at all productive?
Yes and no. The governor has, in previous conversations, alluded to an understanding of our concern that the ad board could be a problem. And then the very next week she comes back and says that it's off the table. And then 2 weeks later she comes back in saying, well, you know, we really would consider that. And then she goes back and talks to her staff who say, you can't do that. You'd be giving up your power for the next 3 years. And then she changes her mind again. I'm getting a little bit of whiplash with Governor Whitmer.
Okay, we'll follow up with some more questions on the budget and other subjects in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Guest this morning is State Representative Bola Fave. Throat problem there. Let's talk about a couple of big issues. The roads. The governor proposed a 45% tax increase on gas. Was not met with any positive response in the legislature. Is the road issue still on the table?
Well, certainly the House Republicans and House Democrats are interested in finding more revenue for roads. I personally think that there's plenty of money in the $60 billion budget, especially considering the governor found $1.6 billion to cut, to increase road funding. We put an extra $400 million into roads, the governor cut it. So I'm not interested in a 45-cent per gallon gas tax increase or the 80-cent per gallon gas tax increase that the person in charge of MDOT, the director of MDOT, just proposed last week. We need to find inefficiencies, but if the legislature funds road projects and the governor line item vetoes them, I'm not really sure what we can do to move forward on this issue.
Education is always a big question as well in the budget, both K-12 and higher education. Do you feel we're doing enough in Michigan?
Well, no, we're not doing enough. This year we were able to get through $240 per pupil increase for almost every Upper Peninsula school. Some of the Upper Peninsula schools that have high funding numbers already compared to the other lower funded numbers, they got a $120 increase. And the problem is that charter schools got $0 increase, and unconstitutionally the governor line itemed words inside of sentences to cut their funding. To put that into perspective, our Native Americans have a school in northern Menominee. That's a charter school. There's a cyber school in southern Menominee that takes 5th and 6th year seniors that are probably not on a path for graduation as of right now, and their current school district allowed them to go and gave them permission to go to this cyber school, which is has a 97% graduation rate. We want to fund those schools as well. Apparently the governor's not interested in funding those schools.
What about the cost of getting a college degree in Michigan? Many people say it's higher here because tuition rates are higher. How do you react to that?
Well, tuition rates are incredibly high. I think the first step towards lowering the cost of education is making sure that students that need a 2-year degree get a 2-year degree, and those that need a 4 need to get a 4. We need to right size the classes that folks are taking. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, yeah, you got to go to school, but if you want to get a good paying job at our local mines, at Boss Snowplow, at EMP, down at Marinette Marine, you might not need a college education. What we've been telling students for far too long is that if you do not get a college degree, you'll be a failure. That's a lie. We need to stop perpetuating that, because we have fantastic, wonderful jobs that'll give you health care, that'll pay for your kids to be able to go to college if they want to go to as well. But you might not need a college degree for it. That's why I sponsored House Bill 4106, got signed into law by Governor Snyder, that mandated that local school districts were required to let students go get an internship at whatever business that they felt was best for them and get high school credit for it. The cost of the school is zero, but they still get funded, so it was a win for the schools, it was a win for local business, and it was a win for the students.
You know, as a longtime observer of the state political scene, it seems pretty clear to me that we're in a situation where it really comes down to money. You know, Republicans have said we will not increase taxes. Democrats have said we need to increase taxes, that $60 billion is not enough to do some of the additional things we need to do. What do you think we have to do?
I think the fundamental question is, how big do you want your government to be? I think there's plenty of room in the budget to cut in certain areas, and we need to increase in other areas. Remember, a Democrat governor cut $1.6 billion in funding. Now, some of that stuff is funding that can't go anywhere else. Our secondary road patrol, which was a $10 fee on top of every speeding ticket they gave out in the state of Michigan. That funds 6 officers in Dickinson County, 3 officers in Delta, and I believe 4 in Menominee. That was dedicated revenue. The governor cut that. Obviously, we can't really get rid of that because the money just sits in a bank account and does nothing. But if a Democrat governor can find $1.6 billion, what she thinks is wasteful spending, I think we have a little bit more money that we can use to direct into high priority topics.
Representative Cambenzi on this show a short time back suggested that perhaps an increase in corporate taxes might be the answer. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not interested in increasing taxes on mom and pop businesses and the job producers in the Upper Peninsula. It wasn't that long ago, need I remind my good colleague from Marquette, that we had 10% and higher unemployment in the Upper Peninsula. You want to go back to those days with 10 and 15% unemployment? Tax businesses. Tax small businesses that are actually the only ones creating jobs. Last I checked, as much as Representative Cambenzi, Markinen, and Senator McBroom and I have tried, we don't create jobs. It's only small businesses, medium and big businesses that actually create jobs. You want to limit the amount of taxes that you levy on everybody. You can't just tax businesses because they'll just go across the river into Wisconsin or go over to Minnesota.
A couple of other matters I want to talk to you about. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take one more break. Once again, our guest this morning is State Representative Bo LaFave. You've proposed some new gun legislation. Tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, I've got a couple different gun bills, I guess. One of them would be to allow individuals with long guns to carry those weapons on a four-wheeler on their own private property. Right now you can carry a loaded pistol on a four-wheeler on your own property, but you can't carry a loaded long gun. That seems silly to me. We also have what I call constitutional carry. The Supreme Court has said that you must either have open carry with no permit or concealed carry. The state of Michigan has decided to do open carry. I think it makes much more sense to allow individuals to have concealed carry and carry their weapons around and not have the bad guys see them. Problem is you need a $115 permit fee from the government to get that, and that serves no compelling government interest or any public safety concerns. To get the weapon in the first place, you need to pass a background check. So there doesn't decrease or increase the number of people who can get weapons. It just lets them concealed carry as opposed to having to show it to everybody when they walk around.
So basically you're saying you would not need a permit to conceal carry a weapon.
Yeah, and we leave the permit process in place for those who want to be able to carry in Wisconsin and Minnesota and the other 20 or 36 states that reciprocate Michigan CPL. But if you plan on living in Marquette or Ontonagon or Iron Mountain and not going across the river with your weapon, you wouldn't need to get a permit.
What do you say to those who say we have so much violence in this country and that we need more gun control? What do you think about that?
A couple things on that. One, that's statistically not true. We're at the lowest homicide rate, I believe, since the 1980s. So homicides are down, violent crimes are down, whether that be with a weapon or without a weapon. Just because the media is showing us every shooting that happens now, as opposed to not showing all of them in the 90s because there were too many to show, doesn't mean that things are actually getting more violent. Number two, if you are a law-abiding citizen who obtained your weapon legally, you're not the problem. The concern is the person who bought it on the black market. They are not getting concealed pistol licenses right now. They're carrying their weapons illegally. So what you want is to have, it's a cliche, but you want a good guy with a gun. Our women and men of law enforcement, specifically in the Upper Peninsula, do a darn good job. But unfortunately, especially with Governor Whitmer's cuts to their budget, we're going to be firing officers, not getting new ones. We need more individuals that can protect their family. And if you look at the Constitution of Michigan, Article 1, Section 6, says every person has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state. Direct quote, period, at the end. Nothing about a permit fee, nothing about a well-regulated militia. It's very clear. This is a constitutional implementation bill.
Only a couple of minutes left. One other issue that's got some attention is some new state restrictions that would limit what mental health counselors can do. And there's been legislation to deal with. Tell us about the issue quickly and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, very briefly, the executive branch decided that they were going to put unreasonable licensing restrictions on addiction counselors mostly, and it was going to make them very difficult to do their job. The legislature responded very quickly. I applaud my members on both sides of the aisle. Unanimous vote to overturn this executive overreach, another one. Passed the House 108-0, I believe, and the Senate took it up as quick as they could as well. So that issue should be put to rest as long as the governor doesn't veto that too.
And what do you expect the governor to do?
I have absolutely no idea.
We have only less than a minute left. Are you happy with the car insurance issue being finally resolved? Are you happy with the results of that?
I wish that the governor would have let me have more of what would have saved us more money. I wish she would have signed it into law without demanding that we wait until July to see savings instead of the 11 months earlier that was in the original bill I voted for. But on July 2nd, rates will go down. I understand a lot of folks are taking a wait-and-see approach. I completely understand that. But I promise you, as long as the governor doesn't do something, again, to unilaterally make action to protect her friends in the ambulance chasing business, the reason why we paid so much in the first place, rates are going down on July 2. The average family in the UP is going to save about $1,000 a year as long as you get more than one car. The $220 per pupil or per vehicle MCCA fee will drop down to $40 if you're over the age of 65 or have private health care or you're on Medicare. So on top of that, there's a personal injury protection that goes down for the vast majority of people. Personally, I'm going to save about $500 a year on my one car. So if you got a plow truck and a husband and a wife and a 16-year-old, 4 cars in the family, you're going to be saving a lot more than $1,000.
Thanks a lot for coming in this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you, as always.
Okay. I'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. This morning I'd like to share a few memories with you about how I got started in this business called broadcasting. You know, when I was a kid, we didn't have television. It hadn't arrived yet in Upper Michigan, nor in much of the country. So I grew up fascinated with radio, which at the time offered the same type of entertainment you see on television today. Radio was television without pictures. I was not only fascinated by radio, I really wanted to be a radio announcer. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I developed that interest. And the older I got, the stronger that desire became. This was way back in the days when there were maybe 8 or 10 radio stations in the entire Upper Peninsula. They were all AM stations, and one of them was WJPD in Ishpeming, where I grew up. I was so interested in being a radio announcer, I would go to WJPD and stand outside the control room window where I could see the announcers at work. The people at the station didn't seem to mind, so I spent many hours watching the guys I admired doing what they do. But there was more to the obsession as well. In my room at home, I would play radio station, reading the news and sports aloud from the newspaper and performing like a DJ, playing 45 RPM records on my Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer record player. There's a lot more I could tell you about how my interest continued to develop, but let me just say that becoming a radio announcer was the biggest dream in my life. And that dream came true when I was a sophomore in high school. After spending so much time around the station, I learned the basics of running the equipment, so when they were looking for someone to step in quickly, I was ready, willing, and able. The local radio stations were very different back then. You know, today when you tune into any station, they feature one music format all day. In my early radio days, every small radio station would play all different types of music throughout the day, although not in the same show. WJPD had a country western show for an hour at 5 o'clock every day called Folk Tune Frolic. They had a classical music show every evening from 8 to 9. They even had a polka party at 12:30 during the noon hour. And because I was going to school and worked the evening shift, I was happy to play the hits of the day every night at 9. And it was working that late shift that created one of my special memories from those early days. You know, back then, the station would go off the air at 10 o'clock at night, but there was one exception at the time. Back then, the county airport was located between Negaunee and Marquette, and it was served by North Central Airlines. I don't understand why to this day, but the airline needed the signal from the WJPD transmitter as they were coming in for a landing. That meant if the evening flight was late, the airline would pay the station a fee to stay on the air until it had landed. Remember, I was a kid in high school who wanted to go home and go to bed, so I wasn't too happy when I would get the call that the late flight would be late. I did, however, concoct a little fantasy in my mind to make the experience a little better. I pictured myself as the hero, like the flight traffic controller we see in the movies, doing all I could to bring the plane and its passengers in safely, flying in on a wing and a prayer with my help. It was a little exaggerated, but it worked for me. I'll have a couple more radio stories for you next week. Back in a minute. A couple of reminders before we go. First, there are local elections coming up for many of you this week. Don't forget to head for the polls on Tuesday. Second, keep UpperMichiganSource.com in mind for election returns and all the news anytime. You can also find this show at that same internet address. Thanks to Representative Bo Lefebvre for joining us this morning for an update on developments in Lansing. And thank you for being here. Let's get together again next Sunday morning.